I'm hearing voice. Anyways. Oh, I got a signal here. So, and remaining focused during a rapid discussion, you'll find you really have to concentrate more. You have to remain focused. Or what about the time when you go into a room and you stop and say, well, what am I in here for? Now, Merle Nopsiger and I spend some time making sawdust over there at the Woodworkers Guild. Sometimes I walk into the room there and I just have to stop. Now, what was I after? I was after a board. What is that board? And then I could spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find the board. Now, I can get really upset if I say, this is abnormal. I hope nobody notices it. No, everybody else there, Merle included, gets disoriented sometimes in that mild sort of way, and that is normal. But if you appraise that as being abnormal, problematic, not good for you. I think it's helpful to say, I'm at a point in my life where things are changing. Oh, key fob. How many of you have misplaced your key fob?
Cell phone.
A cell phone, yes. And then how many times have you gone and taken your wife's cell phone and called your own cell phone so you can find it? What about mild disorientation when driving? I am so thankful for GPS. I was cycling a few weeks ago in Elkhart, and I got thoroughly lost. I was on my bike, so totally disoriented. So I got out my phone, GPS, and tried to figure a way out of my dilemma. So that's what I'm talking about. How do you handle that? What do you do to say, I can accept this normal development? Okay, let's very quick little primer on how your memory works. First of all, you have what's called sensory memory that encodes things. So at any given moment in your life, you are being inundated with all kinds of sensory information. Vision, hearing, taste, smell, touch. So, and in every case, sensory memory is less than a second long. And I could break that down further. Vision, which is a bit of information, visual information, is called an icon. And that's less than a second. And then it's gone. If you do nothing with it, it's gone. And now don't bemoan the fact, imagine if it weren't God. We could have a moment of thanks here that we have forgetting. Memory requires forgetting, and you forget most of the information that comes your way. So sensory memory is less than a second, and then it goes to short-term memory, which is only 30 seconds long. And you've heard, anybody know the magic number in short-term memory? Psych 101.
You forget.
I don't know what you said, but you get a check mark for that. The magic number is 7, and I could demonstrate that here. 7 plus or minus 2. So from 5 to 9 bits of information are in your working memory or short-term memory for about 30 seconds or less. And if we had time, we could go through some exercises to demonstrate that. And then if you've done something with it, it goes to long-term memory. And that's either been stored well or not. Okay, some of you are physicians and nurses, you like physiology. I like to think about the quarterback when it comes to memory. That part of my brain, that sort of is the area that moderates memory, and it's our beloved hippocampus. Here it is. That little, it's in about here in your brain, and it has to do with taking in information, storing it, and if you have a lesion to the hippocampus, it messes with your memory. Now, let's look at that little hippocampus to see if, in fact, it can explain why we are having the experiences we're having. By age 80, now I'm not 80 yet, you have 20 to 30% in size. That hippocampus has shrunk on you. You can do nothing about it. So by age 80, we're down 30%. There's another factor that changes. You know that when it comes to neural transmission, neurons, this is the sending neuron, this is the receiving neuron. Let me just describe it like this. And what happens in this little synaptic gap? We say it's soup, not sparks, even though this is the action potential. When it gets to here, it releases a neurotransmitter. And one of the main ones is dopamine, although there are many neurotransmitters. And sorry to say, no, we're not going to apologize. We're going to accept the fact that our dopamine is on the decline. And so that slows things down on us. That's one of the first things you will notice is processing speed declines with age. Actually, the research suggests that started when you were about 40 years old. And ever since then, you'll find in many ways, processing speed is not what it used to be. So here is a very quick, this is a schematic about what we're dealing with. There we go. This is not how your brain, you're not going to find these pieces in your brain. This is a schematic. So you have your sensorium, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching. If you notice, I'm repeating some things here. That's for the reason I've already mentioned, that our memory doesn't work that way. You've already forgotten much of the stuff I just presented to you. Short-term memory, I said, is working memory. It's like RAM on your computer. That's the part that does the processing. And if you have more RAM, if you have more than 7 plus or minus in your computer, you pay a bit more for it. But so that's short-term memory. This, why is this hard to? So with short-term memory, if you do something with it, you process it there, it goes to long-term memory, and then things get interesting. That could be divided into explicit memory, sort of conscious things, our history, and implicit memory. The implicit memory we won't talk about now. It's also called procedural memory. That is, things happen automatically, but you don't forget to ride a bicycle. The conscious part, episodic memory, there's where we have decline. That's life events that we try to recall. And if we could split that even further, remote memory hangs in there better than less recently acquired memory. Semantic memory, general knowledge, holds up fairly well. So what I'm suggesting here is when you think of memory, there are so many different parts, some of which are what we call our hold versus no hold aspects of memory. And what we complain about is the no hold aspects. So when Beck asked me to do this, he said, these are people who want to discuss things. So I'm going to run through it again in such a way that hopefully will prompt comments on your part, questions. I might add, if you've been sitting there with a question in mind already, I'm going to get coup. That's too bad, because you've been holding that in short-term memory, and you can keep it there, and you by rehearsing. Well, when I get a chance, I'm gonna. You ever notice people at a talk when they line up to address the speaker? Well, they're all rehearsing the question that they're about to ask, which means they're doing nothing else. So if right from the start, you wanted to know, Coop, how's your nosebleed going? You're stuck with that. So is Wilbur Berkey here? No, Wilbur is also part of our illustrious group. And one thing Wilbur does very wisely, he has a little piece of paper and he writes down a few things for himself. He puts it back in here. Perfect. That's what you should do. So, hold versus no hold, those are different aspects of memory. Some is strong, episodic, questionable, but entertaining. Boy, I hear Del Good tell stories at coffee. Yeah, he told that one about 2 weeks ago. It's different now. But what was the context in which he's reconstructing this? I love it. I do the same. Semantic memory, again, is largely hold. So your smarts, if you like, for the most part, don't decline. But processing speed does decline. So a hint to you, when you visit with your grandkids, and some of you know the game Scrabble. Wonderful example there. If you play regular Scrabble with your grandkids, you should be able to clean their clock. Just give me time. Your grandkids, though, they might be rather savvy, and they say, well, Granddad, let's play speed Scrabble. Give it up. They're going to take you every time. So that's a little way to test out what we're talking about. And speed is really the first cognitive decline with age. So if we're going to reset our baseline, if we're going to say, I want to enjoy my life, it's helpful to say my brain is shrinking. It is. If you looked at an image, the ventricles, those spaces in your brain that are filled with fluid, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger with age, leaving less room for gray matter and white matter. And I already said the hippocampus shrinks, dopamine decreases, but there are other controlling factors that you must keep in mind. If you imbibe a little bit, that's going to affect your memory. Anxiety, like when you have to get up in front of a group like this and talk, things might not be quite as clear as you hope they would be. Depression affects grief. Grief is a very helpful illustration because grief really hits you hard. But over time, you tend to come back to baseline. Medication, sleep deprivation, and stress. John, we have problems. Okay, so my argument that I'm making is that it's helpful to accept the decline of your sensorium. I look across here. Almost everybody, not quite everybody, is wearing glasses. That's a wonderful, and that's a relatively acceptable crutch, if you like. We have a more serious problem with echoic memory, hearing. Now, I'll confess, and I've been vain, tried to hide them, and when I bought my hearing aid, I tried to make sure that the color matched as close as possible the surrounding area. But now, I need them. So, do you need a hearing? If at that point you don't do those sorts of things at the sensorial level, if your sensorium is being compromised, memory doesn't work as well. And somebody will say, well, I just told you that. And you say, no. Well, you may not even have taken it in, let alone sent it to the short-term memory for processing, and then to long-term memory. No, if you don't see it or don't hear it, game over. Tactile memory, I couldn't cut that one. I don't understand very well, but there is such a thing as tactile memory. Gustatory memory, taste. Do you find that you need a little more seasoning in your food? Just a little more pepper or some other ingredient to increase that input. Okay, now we get to what are we going to do with that? How are we going to work? And in our group, we've had this discussion. Should we go into denial? And some of you do that, and maybe it's okay. And we can discuss that. Should you just say, no, it's not really happening to me? Versus rumination. And rumination, it would be like denial is, I just won't talk about it. I'll just ignore it. Rumination strategy says, I've got to get myself into a support group. And then we will meet and talk about it and talk about it. When we focus on depression, rumination becomes a very, very important factor. And you have both camps. Some would say, talk it through, talk about it, talk about it. Others would say, if you ruminate excessively, you exacerbate the problem. So, what crutches do you use? Do you enjoy going down memory lane? I think that's a pleasant experience. Meeting with friends, and that's one part of memory that seems to hold okay. So I often said to my students when Thanksgiving rolled around, and they were going to go home and they were going to meet the extended family and grandparents, I often said, if you want to score some points with your grandparents, when the whole group is meeting, they're often not engaged because of all the noise, and so take them aside and say, Grandma, tell me about what it was like in grade school for you. And they still have, that is intact for the most part. And you'll score big points with it. I'm waiting for the day when my grandkids ask me that stuff. Or we could talk about the whole process of engagement versus disengagement, two schools of thought. When you retired, did you insist on remaining engaged or disengagement? My recommendation to students was, if you ever think of getting me something for retirement, don't get me a rocking chair. I'm going to side with engagement. I'm going to find things to do. I think you can also make the case that, hey, I've earned the right. I'm just going to sit back in a rocking chair and watch the sunset. So we could discuss that. Do you gravitate towards engagement or disengagement? I'm going to embarrass my friend, the other Victor, the real Victor. If ever there's somebody that's engaged, it's Victor. He's always up. He leaves early. Oh, I got a meeting. I got a board meeting or something. Okay. Positive emotions enhance recall, believe it or not. Now, I had this set up to show you how this might work. If you remember when I showed you the hippocampus, that kind of crescent-shaped part in the middle brain, at the tip of it was the amygdala. John, just because of your technology, I can't do that here. That's one very important part of emotions. And so when I was preparing for this, I said, that makes sense. You've got the part of the brain managing memory, the hippocampus. Right next to it is one of the seats of emotion. And so here's what you could do is, let's see, buy yourself a little shock box. You can get them. Just a little shock box that you keep in your pocket. And when something is presented to you and you want to remember it, just shock yourself. And in fact, if you were a student, I'd say, if you get the class, that's important. You'll remember it better. Of course, this is all tongue in cheek. And remain skeptical of miracle foods. Drinking all the buttermilk you can is not going to help with your memory. And a little bit of humor helps, of course. So, okay, this is part of memory also has to do with minimizing interference. So if you're in a meeting or in a family gathering and there's all kinds of stuff going on, at least that happens in our family, we have some noisy grandkids, you deal with interference. Now, it dawned on me, I'm going to have this group. I can demonstrate it in the extreme with what's called the Stroop effect. Who here would like to demonstrate this? Who has enough ego strength to stumble in front of this group? Let's see, who would? If there's no volunteer, I will pick somebody out. Rachel. Okay, what I want you to do is as quickly as possible from left to right, from top to bottom. Just mention do this as quickly as you can. Imagine that I have a stopwatch. Okay, just mention the colors. Don't read the words. Okay, ready?
I'm to say colors rather than words.
Just colors. You're going to demonstrate. The rest of you will work along with it. You'll all get frustrated. Okay, ready? Go.
Green, red, purple, yellow, purple, brown, red, green, purple, brown. Oh, this is hard. Purple, red, green, purple, yellow, brown, purple, brown.
And others are sort of urging you on that. Thank you, Rachel. That's so you're getting information in two channels here, and you've got interference, and in very subtle ways with memory. This is happening all the time. So in a church service, wherever you are, you're going to experience some interference, and how you manage that is important. Okay, if somebody wanted to do this again, I'm not going to recommend this, but we could do that again. And I thought, how could I get you to obscure the semantic element, the meaning, the word? Well, some of your eyesight might be such that if you took your glasses off, you would just see a blur. And you would rip through this so quickly. Others might have to pinch your eyeballs a little bit and break some tears and so on. So that would be one way. So interference is another thing you deal with. Mnemonics, you know what mnemonics are? No doubt, those of you who have taken music lessons in the scales, you have these little ditties that you say to yourself that help you remember them. So I found this little mnemonic. It's very easy to memorize. My very educated mother just served us noodles. There we have the planets in order. So those are mnemonics, and I'm going to ask you now to ask some questions. When do we have to sign out? Right about now?
2 minutes, yeah.
One salient question. A less salient question. Del, what would you say?
Tell us again the emotional piece. How do I convince myself I'm really okay with all of those 30% losses?
Repeat the question, Bill.
The question is, how do I say it again? My memory fails me.
The emotional part that goes with how do I relax and say, I've lost 30%, but I guess that's okay. It could have been 40.
Well, Del was saying, what about the emotional piece that affects my memory? What do I do? Well, you demonstrated some. One way would be just denial. Don't think about it. Another one would think about it a lot. I think the term I would use, and I decided not to go there, is one we talked about, is cognitive reappraisal. That there's a series of self-statements that you can make that help you say, for me, it's helpful to know this stuff. My brain is changing. It's all in the normal course of things, rather than say, oh my goodness, this is terrible. So If you went into therapy, a cognitive psychologist might take that route and say to you, how can you rephrase this? How can you think differently about it? How can you stay calm about this? But when it first hits you, your baseline is going to drop when it first. Luckily, this whole process is rather gradual. And so we accommodate, we adjust.
How about if I can accept these things, but I'm not sure my children go along with all of
The question is, I might accept this, but my children might not. Do some of you experience that your children start taking over and saying, I don't think you should do this? And I won't ask how many of you had your key fob taken out of your house by your children. You're not driving anymore. So, well, then we get into family dynamics. I would hope you can openly say to them, this is what's happening to me. I'm okay, this is normal. The real problem is, I think, is when children quickly start diagnosing you and saying you've got such and such. And that's easy, that's so easy to fall into that trap. When the majority of people, when it comes to memory, don't immediately go into pathology of any kind. It's normal, this happens. I read some statistics. The vast majority of us will go through normal aging and memory decline. Now, there are more serious forms, and I don't want to go there. That's another discussion. You pay a psychologist to tell you whether it's pathological or not.
This class has been recorded. Let your children listen to it.
You're kind. You're so kind.
It's comforting to say that as we get older, we're thinking more about the hereafter. When we go upstairs or when we go downstairs, we say, oh, what am I hereafter?
Plus, if I could have taken the physical route, then you start feeling what it's like to climb stairs. Suddenly, that's not as fluid as it once was. That's a parallel discussion.
I think we've given us the wise counsel, and I think we would all agree. He worked hard on pulling this together for us, and we thank you very much.